Ambassador David Fernandez Buyano, permanent representative of the University for Peace to the UN office in Geneva and Vienna. Welcome to A-News, and thank you very much indeed for this opportunity.
Thank you very much about this invitation.
Thank you. Let's talk about the importance of maintaining peace. I mean, when UN was created back in 1945, the main idea was to make sure that all the horrors of previous decades, two great wars that happened in Europe, were not repeated. Now, 8 years on, do you think that in that fundamental goal, UN has achieved this major goal? Because after all, we haven't seen anything of the kind or that we saw back in 1930s and 1914.
Yeah. I have to say that the United Nations, as you rightly say, was established in 1945 with the main objective and purpose to save generations from the scourge of war. This is the main objective of the UN, the promotion of peace and security, but also alongside with the promotion and protection of human rights and development, the three main pillars of the UN. The United Nations, it's merely a dream. It was a proposal by the winners of the Second World War. In that sense, the UN should be also reformed because the balance of power in the world have changed since 1945. Now we have many more states, independent states, recognized by the UN, and also the role played by civil society is much more stronger than today than before. And this show the importance of this kind of gathering today in Baku, in Azerbaijan.
Yep, the world has changed quite considerably since 1945. The Security Council of 1945 reflects the balance of power related to that year, no longer applicable to our realities perhaps. Reform is needed there. Civil society wasn't very powerful back then, it needs to be empowered. Today one of the main speakers talked about the percentage of Global South NGOs with their consultative status represented at the UN and said that that percentage is not commensurate with the number of those Global South NGOs. In fact, Global South as a wider geography is not proportionately and duly represented in international institutions. I would like to go back to the subject about peace. There are those who would say that fundamental goal of the international system created in 1945 and evolved since then was to avoid Third World War. Now we have wars in different parts of the world. We have the war in Ukraine, which could potentially emerge into something global. It is already quite global, of course, but it could emerge into something which we can call Third World War. How unlikely is that that eventuality? And do you think that if that happens, which we hope not, that will be the very end of the international legal system, which is still which still exists?
I think we have to say that the United Nations was born as a consequence of the Second World War. This is part of the history. But the UN is not only the Security Council, the General Assembly, the main bodies recognized in the chapter of the UN. The UN is also the role played by all the funds, programs, and specialized agencies. I'm talking about UNESCO, UPEACE, UNITAR, World Health Organization. They are playing an important role, but it's not seen on the media. The role that they play in conflict prevention on the field. In that sense, I think it's much more needed today, the multilateral system. But we have to say one thing. Us here, as humanity, we have lived in the multilateral system in only 2 generations. This means that the history of the humankind has been a history without multilateral systems. This means the United Nations, but before even, we have the League of Nations. And the UN is based on the experience of the League of Nations. I'm on the view that we need more multilateralism. This means that all the nations in the world, regardless of their size, regardless of the number of population, they have their voice in a decision-making process in the UN through the adoption of resolutions, through the proposals of peace negotiations, and I think I don't see a global war, because as the Pope Francis say, and I present my condolences for the death of Pope Francis. We, as a peace, we work with the Vatican very closely. We are living in a world war in pieces, in many places in continents, from Middle East, also in Asia, in many places of the world. But for that reason, it's much more needed multilateralism to settle all these conflicts through the peaceful means that provided by the chapter of the United Nations. This means diplomacy.
And when we talk about multilateralism, perhaps there are two layers to multilateralism. One is universal multilateralism, multilateralism involving the entire world without any divisions, without talking about global north or global south. But then you've got another sort of a more regional sort of multilateralism within the scope of global south. How would you define global south? Because it's a definition is quite loose. And there are certain countries that we will struggle to identify as being part of global south. They're not exactly global north, but also not probably global south. For example, countries like Turkey or South Korea. Does it really matter the definition of a given country, or do you think it does matter and we need to be more crystal clear about this?
Yeah. One of the challenges in the United Nations system is the lack of definitions. For instance, we don't have definition about peace, even corruption, or even, that you refer, no? What is global south, what is global north, but it's defined by the elements. And then in that sense, I refer to the chapter 6 of the UN, that it's devoted to the relationship between the regional organizations and the United Nations in the pursuit of peace and security. In this sense, I think the role played by the organizations, regional or intergovernmental organizations in the South, in Africa, the case of the African Union, the case of ASEAN in Southeast Asia, play this fundamental role also in the promotion of these values that ingrained in the chapter of the UN, that what is called peace and security, human rights, and development. And this cooperation between regional organizations and the United Nations is extremely important and vital to maintain peace and security.
What's very interesting is that in this region, we have seen the failure of multilateralism in a regional sense of this word, but then that failure produced certain results, and those results gave rise to a new kind of multilateralism of regional scope. I will explain what I mean. The conflict between Azerbaijan and Armenia was not sorted out by means of the involvement of international organizations. There was no multilateral solution, although there were 4 United Nations resolutions and so forth. The point of view of international law was very much clear, but still it wasn't the result of the application of legal norm without force being applied that what happened in 2020 happened. But now we have a completely different scenery. You mentioned about the late Pope. One of his last wishes was the peace in this region between Azerbaijan and Armenia. And these two countries now actually finalized the work on the draft peace agreement, and peace deal will be signed at some point once prerequisites are fulfilled. Do you think what happened in this region after 2020, 2023 could give rise a new form of regionalism, creating a coherent model involving these regional countries, giving rise to a new form of multilateralism?
I have been coming to the region in the past 6 years, and then I have hope in this region. First of all, because and we applaud really, and we are very supportive and encourage this important announcement by the President of Azerbaijan and the Prime Minister of Armenia to agree in a peace treaty. This is an important landmark. It's a breakthrough after 35 years of conflict and war among them. But it's not only the question of signing an agreement. What it's important also is a confidence building process. trust among the peoples of both countries. In that sense, this announcement it's important, but unless there is no exist a ratification by the parliaments, both parliaments, war can exist anytime. If for that sense, I think it's now the time for diplomacy, the time for dialogue, the time for trust-building process. And then we encourage, and I encourage the parties then to go in that direction.
And when it comes to Azerbaijan, perhaps together with other Caucasian countries, because on its own, only perhaps with Georgia, could this region, which is geographically not very big, it's on the continental fault line, at the crossroads where east meets west, and in a sense south meets north, could actually punch above its cumulative weight in such a way that could have wide implications for the world. Because what happened today, this declaration, this announcement of the Global South platform, is a very big development. We're talking about big geography. I mean, 80% of the human population is there. Resources are there, and all the NGOs from Global South are gathered here in Baku, establishing something quite profound. What we see here, in a sense, the reality wherein relatively small country, but resourceful country in terms of its intellectual resources, in terms of being at the crossroads of different webs of multilateral connections, punching above its weight. Is this what UN wants to see from actors like Azerbaijan? Is this the sort of behavior expected from these actors?
Yeah. I remember I participated last month in an event organized by the so-called Turkic states. It was very interesting. I mean, UPs deliver the initial statement. It's an important corridor, the middle corridor between from China to Europe, passing through Kazakhstan, also Azerbaijan, Georgia, Turkey, and Europe. And this is an example about the role play by this region, this huge region that the number of population is high. It's now, of course, we are living in in different times, the times of the war of tariff and so on. And then another example, the European Union, they look more to the Central Asian states. And this is really another example that show the importance of the region and the play role by the Republic of Azerbaijan, what is a bridge between the global south and the global north.
Yes, indeed. It's very interesting about Azerbaijan. We earlier talked about Turkey and South Korea. It would be difficult to define them as global north and global south. I mean, South Korea, a developed country already. Perhaps it was global south before, but no longer, maybe. Bearing in mind its association, affiliation with certain international organizations. With Turkey, you've got this identity which is very, very fluid, which is multidimensional. You've got this NATO element, but not a member of the European Union, and also widely connected with Central Asia due to ethno-linguistic roots. So it's very difficult. Not everything set in stone, so to speak. You mentioned about Middle Corridor. How consequential is this project to change the world we live in today? It's about ultimately China being connected with Europe via Central Asia, Azerbaijan. It is something that it's commensurate with China's Road and Belt Initiative, could be deemed as similar. It is also, in a way, similar and corresponds with Europe's Global Gateway Initiative, which is effectively about gaining access. But the United States of America has got a completely different view on this. They do not want China benefit from being connected to Central Asia and to Turkey. How do you see the wider geopolitics of this debate, which is incredibly complicated?
This shows that the emerging power of the Central Asian states that exist and a balance or a change of power, yes, this is a reality. And then, but we need to look at the corridor, the middle corridor, not only from the perspective and the vision of the economic perspective, also as a way to connect China, for instance, with Georgia, because it's a connection of cultures. It's a corridor of cultures and common understandings, dialogue and cooperation. We need to look at from not only the economic perspective. There are many other aspects that we need to really underline. And this is affecting, of course, it's affecting in a positive manner the stability and peace and security in South Caucasus region. And there are other also initiatives on peace regarding trade and peace presented by the Prime Minister of Armenia. Was presented in a World Economic Forum. This shows that the synergies exist, but we need to connect all the dots.
Yes.
And then we have more opportunities than disadvantage that to be together.
They're putting all the dots together and forming a cohesive vision, benefiting everybody, and it's something that we all trying to achieve, I suppose, in this region and in the wider region. Ambassador David Fernandez Buyan, thank you very much for this very interesting and delightful conversation. I'm so grateful to you.
Thank you. Thank you very much. Thank you, sir.